So for those of you just joining us, we have the pleasure today of hearing from Tonya Manning, the U.S. Wealth Practice Leader and Chief Actuary at Buck, and the current President of the International Actuarial Association. So we thank everyone for joining us today. Tonya, next question, thinking about your leadership experiences, what have you found are the biggest challenges of leading? You've obviously had a lot of opportunities to lead, whether it's at your employer or in the profession with the associations. What are the hard things about those roles?
I think there's so many different aspects of leading, and every role has their unique challenges and opportunities as a leader, and they require different skills. Just thinking from the very beginning of earlier on in my career, one of the things that I had to learn was the concept of managing up. And what that means is to not react to how you're being managed, but actually to influence how your manager is perceiving you and managing you. And that could be things like being clear on what your expectations are from them, being clear on what you are doing and what you see as your priorities, and being more proactive in that being managed role versus just being the manager. I think that's been really key, and as you do that, you're starting to have a leadership role in and of itself in helping guide how your manager is managing not only you, but your team and the work process. Another thing that I found has been really important, and that was kind of the second phase of my learning, was the meeting before the meeting. And you learn this as a consultant, is that you never want surprises, which is really hard for actuaries, and it's really hard. 2020 was really hard. In 2008, it's been really hard. But you don't want surprises, and that's the same thing with meetings. So if you're leading a group and you're going in and you have something you're trying to build consensus on, or you have something that they may not want to hear or not expecting to hear, it's really important to have the meeting before the meeting to kind of not to use the buzzword too much, but socialize the issue, try to get an understanding what concerns might arise, and iron out as much as you can before you have everyone in the meeting. That's the more people you have in the meeting, the more important that aspect is. I learned that kind of in my second phase of learning. I learned a lot of that, honestly, at the Society of Actuaries, where we have some folks who are obviously trying to get big groups together to agree on things where they have divergent views and philosophies. Another thing that I've learned, the third thing I learned, was bringing others with you and getting buy-in. You can be a leader, but a leader doesn't mean you're directing people where to go. There's a difference between directing and leading. And if you are directing people on a certain path that they need to take, a process they need to follow, something they need to sell or promote, that is never going to be effective if they don't follow that journey with you as much as possible. Now, there are times when you have to just have people do things that they don't want or they are not fully bought into, but as much as possible, and particularly when you're managing volunteers, as you know, Michael, you've got to bring people with you, and you have to have those conversations where they feel like they're part of the process of building the solution, executing the solution, and you give them pieces of what you're building that they can support so they feel like they own it, and at the end they can be a part of it. The more you can do that and have those small meetings and conversations and those little pieces of buy-in, the more effective you're going to be when at the end you roll it all out and you're trying to get people to buy into it. So many times I've seen it handled differently, where there's hours and hours spent on coming up with a new solution, and then it's just thrown out there. And sometimes that works, but a lot of times there's a lot of issues or a lot of concerns or just a lot of misunderstandings. And it's a failure, not because the idea was a bad idea, it's just because the idea was not processed properly before it was thrown out.
I think that concept of just getting everyone to buy in as well, everyone feels a sense of accomplishment in helping kind of move whatever objective you're trying to accomplish down the road, right? And so throwing out the surprises a lot of times catches people off guard. And in some ways, I agree with what you're saying there from the standpoint of if you throw those surprises on people that you're trying to lead and manage, that they can almost take that as an insult, that you didn't trust them enough to actually have input into the process.
Yeah, you're never smart enough to think of everything. Well, maybe you are, Michael, but I'm never smart enough to think of everything.
Far from it, Tonya.
And it's better to test the waters first. So even if you're a brilliant person and you have a brilliant idea, if you're not bringing people along. Now the flip side of that, Michael, is that you take too time in trying to get that done. And you know, not everything I've done in my career has been a success, including exams, but also projects that I've led at work. And there was one project in particular that I, upon reflection, realized that I spent too much time and effort trying to get everyone to come along. And we were very delayed in rolling out that final product because I exhausted the group in getting it done. And then I really didn't meet expectations on the timing. So it's a balance, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, and I'm learning this, you know, I'm going through lessons I learned as I went along, is these kind of tie together as far as being authentic and finding your own leadership style. And when I was developing my leadership skills, it's very tricky I learn best by observing other people's actions. That's how I learn most. I can read a book, but if I observe someone doing something and I see how that is perceived or how effective that is, that's always best for me. The challenge I had in my career was all the leaders surrounding me, not all, but many of them were men. And not just men, but men who had what were leadership styles that you more typically observe with men, and most importantly, were not always as suitable for me. But I didn't learn that lesson early on. I thought, well, that's how I must be as a leader, and that did not work well. It wasn't authentic to me, and it was perceived quite poorly. And you kind of layer onto that the fact that I can be a very direct person. If I get to an answer here, unfortunately comes out here way too quick. And it kind of needs to filter, and there needs to be some understanding of how to do it. So I was perceived as being a little bit too curt, and layering onto that, just not being authentic. I came across as being a little too shoving it out there instead of trying to just kind of explain. The more comfortable I got with who I was, and that there are different ways to lead and still be effective, and it wasn't always the leadership styles that I was observing, but there's a little bit of make up your own leadership style that had to happen for me. Once I both figured that out and got comfortable with that, it was such a relief, and it was very rewarding. I am not saying I'm the best leader or I'm a better leader than those who have different styles. That's not the case at all. I'm just saying that I was not able to be an effective leader until I figured out how to match who I am and how I prefer to communicate and work with people with the way that I was trying to lead them as well.
Oh, I completely relate to that, and I think in some cases it's a lot of trial and error, figuring out what style does work for you that you're comfortable with that is also effective, right? That's I think those are really good points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kind of along the same theme here, thinking about your progression through the early stages of your career, what were some of the more difficult challenges you had to overcome, and how did you do it? Things like gender issues, company politics, negativity, difficult bosses, things like that I'm sure you encountered. Everybody encounters those to some level throughout their professional development. So how did you deal with those issues?
Every boss I ever had was amazing and perfect. No. Yeah, I had some challenges there. But again, in that retrospective, looking back on the early stages, first of all, I am cursed with an overly expressive face. And conference calls were fine, Michael, but now we have Zoom, and I'm having to adjust a little bit. But that's very much who I am, and that can be a little bit of a tricky thing, right? I needed to learn how to be a little bit more tolerant, both in my real self, but also in displaying that when I'm talking to other people. Early on, like I said earlier, I was kind of quick to, here's the answer, and sometimes I was right, sometimes I was not right, but I was pretty quick to getting there, and I got frustrated if people weren't keeping pace, and I got the reputation of being a little curt. meaning, I was cutting people off, or I just wasn't listening to people, and that was not, that was doing me no benefit. And I think a little bit of that was the culture that I was in. And I still live in North Carolina, and our culture is a little bit different, certainly, than you're going to observe in my lovely colleagues in New Jersey, who are going to be a little bit more direct with you. So you have to kind of adjust your style based on the culture that you're in, but also being a female, I had to figure out how to be strong to my points without coming across in a negative way. So it was a little bit tricky to kind of back off on you're not always right, first of all, but even if you are right, be a little bit more tolerant in your understanding and listening to people and giving them a chance to kind of explain what they're doing. Been trying to do that. I still am completely incapable of sitting in a meeting and not making a comment. So I will let you know that, Michael, that is impossible for me. It has been tested time and again, and I always fail. But that was one of the big challenges. Another thing, and I think actuaries, I spent a lot of time with actuaries, and I think one of the things that actuaries struggle with, and this was a little bit of an issue for me too, is we're so used to being the smartest people in the room, and oftentimes you can be the smartest person in the room, but there's a lot of smart actuaries out there, and the more actuaries I meet, the more appreciation I have for that. And while I feel like I am very good and talented in certain areas, there are other areas that I'm clearly not the best. And I think having a better acceptance of that is part of my journey and a lot of other actuaries' journeys. Is if you become an actuary, congratulations, you're a very smart person, but you're just one of many, many very smart people. And you need to figure out how to accept what you know, leverage your positives. And if it doesn't mean that you're the most brilliant technical actuary, you could be a very strong consulting actuary, a very strong leader as an actuary, whatever that is. That's okay. You're checking the box as being very smart, but don't always struggle or strive to convince everyone that you are the smartest. Be comfortable with who you are and where you stack up, and it's perfectly fine. The other thing was just the politics in the workplace. That was something that took me a little longer than I'd wished to kind of figure out how to maneuver. We talked about that a little bit more about the meetings before the meetings. Well, when I figured out how to do that, a lot of people were figuring out how to do that before they met with me. And there's just a lot of politics and things that you need to work with. Trying to separate out the emotion and what's the best decision that you need to do, both with your colleagues, with the people who work for you, the people who manage you, and your clients, is always going to give you the best results. And some of the people that I've learned the most from are those who are able to kind of dice through all of the emotions and the politics and really focus on what needs to be done and what is the best outcome, and to try to get through all of that. But with that said, politics I have gotten better at. If you say politics means being able to effectively network and have conversations with people and figure out how to collaborate with them on developing solutions, that's always going to be an important part, and it isn't always a negative. And I guess the last thing is knowing when to leave and when to quit. There have been commitments I've made as a volunteer, or teams I've been assigned to as an employee, that I mentioned earlier that I was a little bit stubborn, and I don't know how to say I give up, I quit. But that is important to know how to do. And I've talked to some folks earlier in their career, not at my company, even at other companies, and they're explaining their situation and how to fix it. And I think it's important at some point to learn how sometimes it isn't fixing it, but it's changing it. And it's okay that you need to switch or pivot or go to a different role, a different team, or even a different company. You need to find out what works for you. We get very determined going through these exams. It kind of beats that into you. You have to be very focused and very dedicated, but don't be dedicated to something that's not right for you. Those are just a few things. Any reactions to that?
Those are great. No, I definitely appreciate all of those. I think you're right, especially on the knowing when to leave, knowing when to quit piece. We're just natural, I think it's stereotypical, but natural overachievers in some some fashion, right? That for, I think, the majority of actuaries to admit that they're done, that they need to move on to something is quite challenging.
Yes, yes. It's okay that you made a bad choice to join this group, just like it's okay it was a bad idea to get that haircut. You know, let the hair grow out and move on. Make a different choice in the future.
That hasn't been a problem for me in a while.